Today I'm joined by Angela and Wade Fransson, founders of the Royal Falcon Foundation. Their work brings youth into relationship with land through service, gardening, and spiritual education. Together they developed the Soul Seeds curriculum, inviting young people to grow character and community the way a garden grows, through care, diversity, and stewardship. We've had the joy of working together on programs for youth and families in Wisconsin and Arizona. And today they join us from their home in Brooklyn, Wisconsin, to share what they're learning about freedom, responsibility, and cultivating a more beautiful world. Angela and Wade, welcome.
It's a joy and an honor to be with you here today.
Yeah, we're so excited to be here and to talk about the programs that we've done together.
Likewise, yeah. Well, it's good to see you on the mic as we've spent quite a lot of time together in the past few years. The 2020s have been an adventure, to say the least. And as I understand, the Soul Seeds curriculum is part of the Royal Falcon Foundation, which we are creating together. But the Soul Seeds curriculum is kind of your new framework of teaching. So when you first began Soul Seeds, what kind of harvest did you hope to grow within the hearts of youth?
Well, I think the context that we should put this in is that we were doing sort of large-scale summer camp programs that were, resource intensive, time intensive, happening on our property. And we had the idea that these things could be transplanted and grow elsewhere, but the truth was it was kind of complicated to get the kind of large-scale project going that we were doing through the leadership program, the summer camps that we were doing. So Soul Seeds was conceived of some of that in a box, right? To where you could take raised bed gardens as the focal point and the center point, which could be built quickly by people with little experience, so that this program could be incubated here, but transplanted very quickly, very safely and effectively into lots of different communities. So the idea behind Soul Seeds was that we had sort of perfected the plant here, and now we had the seeds and they could be planted almost anywhere quickly.
Yeah. And we had hoped that the youth would love the natural world, be connected, because the more they're connected to it, the more they're going to care for it. We also wanted to get them really grounded in reality, knowing that our modern world kind of takes them into a kind of a not so reality or fantasy world. So we wanted to get them rooted, grounded in the ground reality.
I love that. Kind of inverts what people usually associate with reality, which is our material reality. I suppose that's a form, of life. Is part of life is the material reality, but it is in a way a fantasy, I suppose, if you believe in like the Matrix. The real world is the garden, the natural world that we step out to every day if we choose. And as you were speaking about soul seeds and like just the act of sowing a seed and having it grow, reminds me of some early experiences that we had together with the kids, because we used some poetry and some spiritual teachings to uplift them as seedlings. They're like young teenagers, and they are effectively kind of being transplanted. When you start seeds, as we've done kind of in tandem together in previous springs, you actually have to harden them off, so to speak, is the agricultural term, and kind of like parents gradually letting their kids out in the world and having them learn their own lessons. You have to expose the seedlings to sunshine little by little, the elements such as the wind little by little, before you establish them in a bed or in the ground. And having worked together in both Wisconsin and Arizona, where there are certainly differing climates, I've seen how relationship becomes curriculum itself. Like, that's not fantasy. Relationship is truth. And observing this connection between people, plants, and purpose What would you say is the deepest teaching that's coming to light through your curriculum and otherwise?
For me, the analogy of a plant and a tree is really where it starts. The plant, the tree, puts its roots down into the soil, into the dirt, and then it reaches up to the light. Here behind me, I have the sun and the moon, and that always reminds me of the fact that in the creation story, as represented in Genesis, God puts the greater and lesser lights in heaven to rule the day and rule the night. And when we, as human beings, submit to that light, we're empowered. We have sovereignty. We can grow. When we deviate from the light and turn towards darkness, that we become enslaved in some way or another. So the point is, the soil is not dirty, right? There's this dichotomy. There's the fall. I don't believe in that interpretation. The soil is the soil, and that's where we are. This is the womb that we live in on this blue-green jewel floating through space, the Garden of Eden. And then we stretch our branches up to the light, which is where we really get the growth and sustenance, which comes from the divine. So that's kind of the basis of everything we do, is to give those real world experiential opportunities, but then the guidance to look up towards the light.
And our goal was to teach the kids that everything has a purpose. And one of our purposes here on this earth is to be stewards. And so we would teach the kids to be stewards, and that common goal or that common purpose that we shared, I think really brought together the youth, and it really helped them to, plant these seeds of deep friendship that occurred. And it was such a beautiful process to watch as the leaders of the camp, or the leading the camp, watching them interact together in building chicken coop or planting trees or planting a garden. It was so beautiful and such a joy to watch them. And I think it came down to that common purpose, that we're all here to help be those stewards of the earth.
I love that. And we've discussed the idea of diffusing a fragrance like roses do to attract that community in an authentic way rather than force things. Have you seen that principle unfold with youth and families?
I think we have, because I think that, again, when we had this common purpose and we're out in the natural world, using the natural world as an inspiration, I think that's really attractive. In one of our last camps, we used the analogy or inspiration of a butterfly, a bee, a bird as transformation, and how we can all transform. And it's this journey that we're all on, just like the natural world is, a butterfly starting as a caterpillar and going into a butterfly, watching those processes, and that we're all going through the same thing. And so it was beautiful to see the kids really, seeing the inspiration of the natural world, and then looking at themselves and how they can transform. And we saw those transformations occur in the camp when we focused on these spiritual principles.
Yeah, and I love the concept of diffusing the fragrance, right? And I think, that quote, I think I first heard it coming from a Bahá'i perspective about, disseminating the teachings of the divine, right? And what has happened with religion is it's a very potent fragrance as people get, sort of fixated on certain doctrines and beliefs, and they want others to sort of conform to those very specific ideas. And different cultures, different societies have different fragrances that appeal to them, right? I lived in Germany for 10 years, and I remember people complaining about neighbors moving in from another country because they didn't like the smell of their food that they were cooking, which I thought was awesome, right? Because depending on what fragrance we're accustomed to, one is appealing to us and one is overpowering. So diffusing the fragrance, the art of the perfumist, is to take a few parts per million, right? To let it just sort of, it's almost more of a hint at it. So it's not indoctrination, it's not lecturing, it's not preaching. It's letting your light shine is another way to look at it. People can choose to look at it, look away, but if it's appealing, if it's a hint of something that evokes feelings, emotions, memories that are positive, that's what diffusing the fragrance is. It's attracting the way that bees are attracted to flowers from afar off.
Yes, and when we look at the experiences of a butterfly or a bee, I think like the butterfly transformation is rather, I mean, it's technically cocooned. It's more of like an individual experience of transformation and finally release and into the real world, kind of like releasing a seedling or hardening off a seedling. Whereas with bees, the transformation is happening in teams, and we've worked in teams, rather. Um, in many different instances and activities, whether it's planting a garden, whether it's like an obstacle course. I know, Wade, you're very passionate about the obstacle courses that you've created at our camps. And it's also we've discussed, I know in my lessons embodying humanity as flowers of one garden, we've discussed different temperaments, different personalities, even in seed form, which can be compared to human personalities. We have the nasturtium seed, which needs extra time and help opening up. You could file the seeds, you can soak them overnight before sowing them. Whereas a tomato seed, that tiny little seed, might just sow itself, might sow volunteers. In fact, you might have to prune and to pick the strongest ones. So competition, which brings us back to your obstacle courses, Wade, competition is actually a healthy and natural part of the process of teamwork and of transformation.
Yeah, I'll just a comment about the obstacle courses we did. We called them leadership courses. And what we had was different stations, and the kids that participated, they would work on a plan on how to they would have some information about what the challenges were going to be. And then they would decide who would lead the team through each of the different stations. And they all had to step up and be a leader at one of the stations. And then they also all had to be followers. And there were other teams going through it. So there was a prize, there was that competition. But within the team, there was a lot of cooperation, and the team that learned cooperation and letting the diverse talents and abilities of each one find their right expression, that was the team that was going to do better.
And that's the idea of unity and diversity, how it was played out in humanity, right? That each child had a different maybe skill or capacity. Some were maybe more physical, they ran really fast. Some were more intellectual, that they could figure out the math or the science of the problem. They each came with their own skill and capacity that they shared with the group. And it was a really beautiful unfolding of that when we did those challenge courses.
And when we think of diversity, I guess you could say in the material, more trending world, diversity can be an uncomfortable topic because we're kind of all on the same page about that, how it's embodied in workplaces and kind of forced, and it's not, frankly, I don't think it's a sacred force or natural force. It's, putting people into categories that, race is a social construct, for example. And diversity is more than just color, even. It's texture, it's personality, it's temperament, it's different skills, different capacities. Plants have different capacities too. Like tomatoes will volunteer, eventually, for example, permaculture spaces can take care of themselves. It's like self-care. Once you arrange them properly, establish them for a couple of years, they're more independent, just like we have more independent people or more independent teams or organizations, whereas some are, they're more deliberately organized, so to speak. So I think the language of agriculture really is a universal language. And that's just what I love about it. And the way we even collaborate together, it's like, we're kind of embodying what's not so much a fantastical world, but a real one in which we can translate all these different concepts and in a comfortable, inviting way, rather than like a top-down traditional public school kind of tactic of these are the rules, but rather how can we sprout up from the roots rather than enforce our man-made ideas top down.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. Just one comment about unity and diversity. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and I have had experience over the course of my life and lived in 7 different countries been involved in multiple different religious groups, and speak multiple languages, and you have these perspectives of commonality and unity. And this idea of unity and diversity, what tends to happen if we don't dig deep, if we don't put our roots deep into the soil and get pure water and, access to the light fully, we come up with these sort of twisted versions of this. And most recently, I've been thinking about how many proponents of diversity want no diversity of thought whatsoever. They want uniformity of thought. They want unity of thought. And that's where they get their sense of community and their sense of unity. And then they focus on diversity of outward characteristics, right? Those characteristics just really don't matter. Skin color is like meaningless in any real world situation, right? But a different perspective, a different ideology, a different thought pattern, a different culture, those things matter. That's true diversity. You get a group of people who think differently together and they can solve a problem. You get a group of people who have different skin color but are uniform in their approach and their thinking. They don't have the diversity needed. Those outward characteristics are actually not diverse at all. They're almost meaningless. They're just labels put on jars at this point. And I don't think we've really understood that in terms of what diversity really means or looks like. So we have polarization and we have, constant fighting and culture wars. Everything turns political today. Every single thing turns political because people want uniformity of thought. And then they claim that they appreciate diversity based on having a multitude of meaningless characteristics in that uniformity.
Yeah, and the unity and diversity, I think, only will make us stronger. And that was something that we really tried to infuse into the camp through the lessons of the planting and the soil, right? So I had them really focus on their skill of observation, feeling the soil and seeing the difference between a dirt and then a soil, adding in the compost, adding in the worm castings, thinking of that and really feeling it and then observing. And that skill of observation, I think, is really a skill that is more needed, right? And that we forget about. So I taught the kids, let's observe the soil and also the plant world, seeing the diversity in the plant world and how important that is. And that if they saw that beauty in the natural world, how they would appreciate it in their real world, or in the human world, I guess, not the real world, to appreciate it and to learn from it.
Observation is a concept that came up when I had our mutual friend Jacqueline Clare, who's a painter, on my show just a couple weeks ago, actually. And so much of like the artistic process involves observing these, as she would put it, kind of sparks of spirit or sparks of God or whatever you believe, just these details that otherwise you might miss. And what people see, of course, is usually the finished product. They see the painting, they see the show, they see the book, they see the poem, or they see the finished product. Just like with a garden, if you have a garden party, people just are perhaps in awe of, oh, how did you create this? But when you're actually in that process, even the soil, like you said, is not dirty. It's not dirt, it's enriched soil. And the metaphor there, when you're co-creating a better society, is you have to have a strong foundation. You have to have common virtues agreed upon, common morals, just almost like a contract, loose contract. But it's essentially the grounding that you grow upon. Otherwise, it's just chaos. And of course, there's beauty in seeming chaos, like a wildflower garden. But we've mainly been working in raised beds, which I think is very wise, actually, pots and raised beds. For one, I do find that growing in pots and beds is easier to maintain, at least short term. But for another, a little bit more, broadly, when we're creating unity, so to speak, if we imagine this near utopia where everyone is kumbaya across the world, we are all one, imagine that. I think when we're in the process of creating the best world we can possibly imagine, it's more realistic to be planting people or grouping ourselves into pots, into beds, because unity doesn't necessarily mean that we're all established in the same space, because clearly in our society today, we do not have an established set of morals, values, and virtues that we've agreed upon.
Yeah, the material world has rules and laws, and you must work within them. And, if you jump off a building without any kind of assistance, gravity is going to take over and you won't like the outcome. The real world has very many complex rules, laws, systems in place. And it's both a forgiving and an unforgiving space, right? As we grow and develop societies, we can create safe spaces that sort of move those rules and those harsh laws of, if you go into outer space, you're not going to survive, to create a nurturing, comforting womb. But then going out and exploring how the world really works is transformative and informative. And as you point out, everything in nature has boundaries and establishes boundaries. The cell wall in biology is a semi-permeable membrane that selectively determines what it lets in and keeps out. And the DNA and the RNA work together to keep the cell alive and healthy by having a boundary, a border between the inside and the outside world that selectively lets things in and out. This is just one of the topics in this nation that we're wrestling with and struggling with. And if we look to nature, we see that some of the perspectives of those who might disagree with us on exactly how those boundaries should work in different ways in different societies, we might have a little bit more respect for those different perspectives, and we might work together to find a solution that works on these topics versus pitting ourselves against each other in existential to the death battles, which literally are playing out in existential to the death battles around us and in our neighboring state here. We're in Wisconsin.
And realizing that we're all in this together, right? It's not us against them. And that's kind of the shift we want to make and trying to focus on, especially in these camps, trying to teach our kids that we're all in this together. We all can come from a different perspective or a different mindset, but we are in this together. And I think that's really key, because if you think of it that way, it really, really shifts when you see people and maybe you don't agree with them. It's not going to be like, you're wrong and I'm right. We need to be part of the solution. And the way we can be is by thinking in that term, to think we're all in this together. It's not you against me.
Although sometimes in the plant world, it can be
Yeah.
you against me. For example, cabbages, they don't even like to be planted too close together, but they secrete a substance that prevents many plants from growing near them, such as those delicate strawberries, which have more shallow, delicate roots. And it doesn't make coleslaw made from cabbage wrong, or strawberry salad, wrong either. Neither is wrong, although of course we have different tastes. And even plants, actually, I've learned, can infuse one another. Like this is kind of a rumor, but apparently I think it's chamomile can increase or kind of inspire the flavor of cucumbers. But of course you wouldn't want your cucumber tasting exactly like a chamomile tea, of course, but it's a little bit more complex than that. Chamomile and cucumbers, among many examples, are companion plants, just like we have companions amongst people, friendships. I learned kind of the hard way at our first camp that we should be cultivating friendships rather than relationships, because when you let the word relationship run wild amongst teens, they they take it in a more romantic context. And of course, there's lessons to be learned there, but I think when we kind of course, relationship, we understand as a more broad term, whether it's platonic, professional, and so forth. But friendship, it's honestly, it's not discussed as much. Whenever you look at the category of relationships, if you Google that, it automatically goes to dating and marriage. And there are families, what's actually called a family in agriculture as well. there's a lot to unpack there. There's even relationships amongst the microbes in the soil, and which I think you touched upon too. When we consider a paradigm shift and we kind of balance boundaries with companionship, interconnectedness, we also come back to the topic of stewardship. And many people associate their homes, their property as ownership. We own this land. And that's true. If you've bought a house, if you bought property, effectively you do own the land. But you've been exploring stewardship rather than ownership. And Wade, you mentioned discussing a 508c1A framework with an attorney as part of that vision. What is a 508c1A, and how might going this route shape your property's purpose going forward?
Well, we're just at the very beginning exploratory phases of this, but let's talk about ownership for a moment. So if you want to understand how much you really own your property, try not paying your taxes for a while and see how long you end up owning it, right? That's part of the issue. And what the 508c1A, if I'm getting the letters right, the alphabet soup, we founded the 501c3, the Royal Falcon Foundation. I'm still struggle sometimes remembering the sequence of those letters. But this is a construct that actually exists outside of that state ownership, and this is a membership participation, and the idea of stewardship is something that is infused in this. It's not part of the legal construct. But what we're trying to do in discussions around this is to say that ultimately we don't own anything, and you can't take it with you. So the stewardship idea is getting in alignment with the creator, or however you understand that these things came into existence and how they were gifted to us. It's a subtle mind shift, but the legal construct is one that can be used. It's actually designed for churches, which puts them outside of this legal state ownership. It really, in a sense, goes back to the concept where Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and that render unto God the things that are God's." And he said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, then my servants would fight. But it's not from here," right? So this idea that nobody owns the land, nobody owns the land, but you can secure your use of the land through a 508 structure in a different way than you would with other constructs. And then what you do with it can be infused with this idea that I'm not the owner, I'm the steward of it. And it must be, when we bought this property, and because of the camps, we always emphasize this beautiful property that we have here that we work on. The only way in which we felt comfortable buying this property and taking ownership of it and benefiting from it was with the idea that it's not just for us. If we just used it for us and our children, it would be a negative thing. It would actually be detrimental to our journey and to our soul, to have this privilege just for us. So we dedicated it from day one to service for others and to make sure that we are constantly thinking, how can we allow others to benefit? And then we become the stewards. There's a ton of work involved with it. It's hard work, but it's a sacrificial work to make this benefit available to others as well. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but that's where we're at in our exploration of this construct right now.
Yeah, I know it's just the beginning of the 508c1A. I'm just happy that we've even learned the term at this point. And when we consider this kind of mindset shift from ownership to stewardship, what do you think changes in a person or a community when land is understood as trust rather than possession?
Well, I think that we've really tried to instill that in our children and our family. Moving from the city out to the country, we were grateful for the honor of being able to take care of this piece of land and try to do the best we can. We've in our camps have planted trees. We have apple trees, cherry trees. We have chickens. We have added bees, and we will be doing more bees this summer. So I think we're trying, and we've learned about the regenerative farming or gardening, again, trying to improve the soil. So I think we all have to play a part in helping to be these stewards if we want for future generations to be able to enjoy it, because unfortunately we know that the soil is with the GMOs and the sprays, that things are unfortunately not in a good position. So if we can play a role or play a part, as small as it might be, we're really grateful for this opportunity.
And I think people are really searching for ways to create both a more free and virtuous society. And I think the garden can really be a sacred blueprint for a more beautiful world. How do you think, just going back to the soil, how do you think working with the soil is helping the youth experience unity and diversity in an embodied way?
Well, the first thing is getting your hands into that dirt. It just, even the feel of it, the tactical, experience, the flavors. I know that when you were here working with the companion planting, teaching them about those differences and letting them know that they could eat different plants, different parts of the plant than they were aware of. It's like an altered state right away, especially when half the time they're walking around with the phone in front of their face during the day, and you have to almost pry it out of their fingers. So there's just something magical, spiritual about directly interacting with nature, with reality. Not, and I'm reminded when we had this visit from these children who were part of something called the Door of Hope program, and they had not really experienced nature at all. And we had this little scavenger hunt, which they really liked. And some of them found something that wasn't on the list of things to look for. The things to look for were like pine cones and leaves and, sticks and this and that. Somebody found a frog, and everyone was just energized and excited. They'd never seen a live frog. They've never held a live frog in their hand before. And I grew up, out chasing frogs in the pond. But kids in the city, they don't have that opportunity today. And it was astounding, the difference. One of the children there, Angela, why don't you tell the story about the smile?
Oh, yeah. It was a beautiful thing we were a part of with these kids from the Door of Hope, came out for a lesson, and we were told by the leader of the group, or the teacher, that one of the girls she had been working with for close to 2 years, this was the first time in those 2 years that she saw this young girl smile, which was such an amazing thing to be a part of, to see her. And I think it was just to being a part of the natural world. And she lives in a city. She has a very hard life. And most of those kids, when we went through the art experience that we had, the lesson, they put that they had a lot of anger inside of them and they didn't like it. And to just even to be able to sit there and reflect on what they wanted to work on, most of them said they wanted to be less angry, and these were young children between 8 and 12 years old. So,
and I might add, it was just coming out of the tail end of the worst of the COVID lockdowns, which in our state were pretty serious. These lockdowns, perhaps more extreme here in Wisconsin than some other parts of the country, and the isolation.
It's really profound to hear these young children say, of all things, that they need to release their anger. That's usually something that comes on like silent retreats or spiritual retreats in adulthood. And in Buddhist teachings, patience is a real virtue, and true unity does come from patience, discernment, boundaries, as we said, even proper spacing, as we call it in the natural world of the garden. But just specifically, would you say the virtue of patience has come up in any of these workshops?
I'm laughing because that's my biggest weakness. I don't have much patience naturally or whatever circumstances. So yeah, that's something that constantly comes up in my awareness. And if it isn't, my kids and others will remind me.
Yeah. I can't think of anything specifically with the kids, but I think that that's a definite thing that we're all working on, and yeah, a virtue that we all could learn from, especially from the natural world, right? To just be patient. And I think with the youth, so we did also a garden this summer with our son's youth group, and I think the patience of watching things grow, and we could kind of did a little bit of a diary, and when we planted it, and then we went back and seeing the things grow, and just the patience of waiting in the garden again for things to the actual fruit to come. But that was one of the most amazing gardens that we participated in, and that we had at least 500 tomatoes that we harvested from this little garden, and the food went to some food pantries and to some to the local apartment where we did this in. So, and people were even coming and taking it, which was the kind of the idea. But I think that group really struggled a little bit with their patience, and hopefully learned and grew from it.
Waiting and observation absolutely is a part of the process, and I think patience also I think we can all relate to this on our end, and patience comes from reminding one another of the larger picture. We call certain forces in society integrative and disintegrative between us at Royal Falcon Foundation. And in the world of gardening and in the plant world, pruning promotes life, deadheading makes way for the new. Could say pruning and deadheading are disintegrative, and promoting life is integrative, and it's all working together. Again, just like plants that don't get along, doesn't make one right or one wrong. It's just part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And looking to the garden too as the roots, right? I think that something we instilled with the roots, they communicate, and that we tried to instill consultation, right? That we all have to share our perspective, and then we need to listen, right? And that can be really hard and take patience. But we can look to the natural world for that idea. The idea that these companions communicate through the root level is an amazing idea. And to think that too, we can consult, we can work things out. We can't just say you're bad and I'm good. We can go to each other. We can go to our brother. We can go to our sister and say, you know what? That didn't make me feel so good, or, and work it out, just talk through it. And consultation is, I think, the key to that, creating peace within our communities, within our families.
It's a challenge, though. I think conceptually it's easier said than done. But it's a reminder that unity can come through diversity, diversity of backgrounds, of personalities, of opinions. And our programs welcome youth and families of all ages from many backgrounds. How do you see, or how do you think you create space where belief, questioning, and freedom of conscience can coexist naturally? And how can we honor healthy space and be guided by this joyful interdependence? Not just through discussion and concept, but hands-on.
Well, I think our goal was always to have that unity and diversity. So we were always really welcoming to all different people. And that was the goal and mission. So when we had that goal and mission in mind, where we wanted people from every different perspective, to have this experience with us, to come and to join what we were doing. I think with that in mind, it brought people and it made people feel welcome. Again, like you said, it's challenging, right? Especially with youth and children. They all kind of sometimes went into their own little pot or their own little, raised bed, and others went to other raised beds. So it's challenging, definitely is. But that's the kind of the space we wanted to create, was, again, bringing people of all different perspectives together. Again, even though it can be challenging, but knowing that each and every one of us has a piece of the truth, right? Nobody owns the truth. And that if you share your perspective or your truth, we can come closer to the truth. Just again, saying you're wrong and I'm right is not going to help solve any problems. And we need to be that example to the youth. And I think that is what we try to do in our camps.
Yeah, and I would add the idea of perspective, focusing on this idea of perspective versus truth, right? I'm not a fan of the formulation my truth. I don't think you have truth. I don't have truth. I don't have my truth. I have my perspective on things. There is truth. I believe truth exists, but none of us have it. And what I perceive is not the truth. But I have a perspective. It's the old story of the blind man and the elephant. One person's looking at the ears, describing them. One person's looking at the trunk, describing them. One person's describing the tail and the leg. And they can't agree because they each have a different perspective. So shifting the topic from truth to perspective, I think, is important. And secondly, the idea of unity, going back to this idea that conformity of thought is not unity. Hitler's Germany was sadly united, right? At a point in time, everyone likes to evoke Hitler, and use Hitler as everybody's Hitler today. I don't mean it in that way, but there was unity in Germany at that time. And I spent 10 years in Germany and have some insight into whatever psychology was going on. But the point is that uniformity and conformity of thought is not true unity. Conflict is necessary. Only in the clash of differing opinions can the shining spark of truth emerge. So you have to have some of that tension. You have to have that creative tension. So when we said we wanted diversity, again, we didn't just want differences of color. We wanted people from different walks of life and different perspectives. And then we wanted to put them in situations that were challenging so that there would be some robust discussion, even some arguments about how to get through the course, and then to debrief about what worked and what didn't and why. One more example that I'm focused on a lot recently is, again, this creation story from the Garden of Eden, where you have these two trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And Adam and Eve are told they may not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they do anyway. And I look at that story today as being kind of like the FBI bringing you into a room and you're being accused of a crime. And, the agent says, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, right? The truth is there was no easy way. Even if Adam and Eve had chosen the tree of life, the path from lump of clay newly created and given life and given freedom of choice and giving capacity to become like God, and then created in his image, and then to move forward in time and actually develop the virtues and the characteristics. There is no easy way. It's always going to come through pain, hardship, and that tension, that conflict, the difference of opinion. They are a necessary part of life.
And that only makes us stronger. Again, these differing viewpoints, these differing perspectives. If we all, again, came together, it would make us stronger.
Ideally, yeah. I figured you were going to bring up the clash of differing opinions. If not, I was going to say, Wade, what's that quote? And when I picture clash, I picture swords. Just like this, coming together. And it's actually that spark, perhaps, that is the truth or closer to that truth. It's not that one sword is right and the other sword is wrong.
Yeah, the biblical analogy is iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
And so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. That's the part of it,
And I was going to say, in addition, we're here to help each other, right? We're here to make each other better, like that again. And again, thinking of that mind shift of thinking, okay, we're in this together. We're here to make each other better, right? Not to, again, just fight and say you're wrong and I'm right, but we're here to make each other better. That's, I think, part of also our purpose here on this earth.
Yeah, the fact that I view things differently says nothing about you or your viewpoint, right? I'm not arguing or fighting with you. I'm presenting a perspective of what I see, that my belief is you may not see this, and I want you to at least try to see this, because if you don't see what I see, then your opinion is only partially formed. And if I can't listen to what you see, then my perspective, my viewpoint is lacking something. And so I'm reaching a wrong conclusion because I don't have that input.
And you've mentioned a few moments from camp, primarily the one with the frog. Could you share maybe another moment from a camp or workshop when you witnessed a young person open like a seed at the right season?
Yeah, I can think of one young girl who actually you met at that summer camp you were there, but she's been back, and she shared that when she first came to the first summer camp, she said, I was really angry. And again, that anger, which is this 12-year-old child. But then in the transformation, the next one, we talked about being the change we wanted to see in the world and seeing our personal transformation, again, being inspired by the natural world. And she said, I need to work on forgiveness. That was like, and she came up with that all on her own. And she said that by coming to these camps and really thinking about these spiritual sides of us really helped her to kind of learn. And she's 12, 13 years old. And I was amazed with her level of insight to herself. It just was really a beautiful thing to witness, to be a part of, to see her growth and to see her on her path. And again, that's the idea, is to help these saplings, adding a little nutrient to it to see them grow and blossom.
Yeah, and I'll share an example that's a little bit more broad, but it was in the first camp when we were deciding on what kind of activities to have. And I wanted to make sure that some form of campus improvement that I know from my background. And I did summer camps and youth programs for decades of my life, which is where some of these ideas came from. And I wanted to make sure there was this idea of campus improvement where they're going to work while they're here. They're going to contribute to the camp by doing some things that materially change. And it's not just going to be virtue signaling about something. It's going to be something that actually helps transform the property. So we have lawn that has to be mowed, and there are these places where there were a few rocks sticking up a little bit. And I wanted to get these rocks dug up and moved out. And I shared that I think this is going to be something the kids will love, right? Digging up and moving these rocks. And certain unnamed people were saying, no way, no one's going to want to do that. And I said, somewhat brazenly, somewhat arrogantly, I bet you that this is going to be the thing they remember most and love the most. And so after we did this, and there were some rocks that were substantial and really hard because you have a little bit of a tip, and then you start digging around it, and it's this massive boulder. And we had to work for hours to get that rock out of the hole, and they get to roll it down the hill and have it be a marker at the base of the hill for the camp. And when I asked after the end of the camp, what was your favorite thing? Sure enough, one of the boys said, moving the rocks, moving the rocks. And it was heartwarming, not only because I was right, that was, of course, wonderful, but it was heartwarming because where I was coming from was a testosterone-based perspective. In our community, we work a lot with art and quotes and nice, little creative projects. But there's something, I'm sorry, very masculine about digging up and moving big boulders and gaining the experience that I moved that rock. Nobody else could move it, and we did it. We accomplished something substantial hard. And so that, for the boys that experience that, but for all of us generally, that those things are needed. Again, this diversity of activity. And what one person hates, another person will love.
Diversity of activity should be in our curriculums. That is important as well. When you mentioned forgiveness, it reminded me of a story. I believe it's from a book called Conversations with God. And in the story, there's this little soul. If you believe in incarnating as the little soul before it's born, and God asks the little soul, what virtue, or like, what do you want to be? What spark of light, what part of God do you want to be? And this soul says, I want to be forgiving, cheerfully. I want to be forgiving. And I kind of imagine God, if we could hear what was going on in his mind before he spoke, think like, you want to be forgiving, like not creative, not like any sort of other virtue, not any other spark. Oh, I know I want to be forgiving. And that is a hard lesson. I think it's the hardest for anyone of any age. It's a constant learning experience and choice. But in this story, one other soul steps forward and volunteers to do the bad thing that the other little soul will have to forgive. And the first little soul says, why would you do this thing? Why would you lower your vibration? Why would you forget who you are entirely to do this thing for me? The little soul is so grateful. And his companion there at the time says, well, it's because I love you. Simple as that. But you have to promise one thing. You have to promise that when I do the worst to you that you can possibly imagine, that you remember who I am. Not even remind, but just remember, just know that I am a spark of God. And they dive in and incarnate together and fulfill their agreement.
Beautiful.
It's powerful.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. I love that. Again, that we all are again in this together. Those, seeds or souls helping each other on our paths.
It's the kind of story that's needed to truly appreciate the depth of that simple saying, love your enemies.
Yeah.
And so much of the conflict that I'm seeing around us is people just completely unwilling to, even for 1 second, consider the perspective of the others. They're just so quick to slap a label on them. And, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. Some of those people who would be the quickest to say we shouldn't other others do nothing but other others who they feel are othering others. I mean, it's like a Dr. Seuss, Sam I Am, Green Eggs and Ham, going around othering people for othering people.
It's true.
Instead of considering their perspective that, you've got a point.
Yeah.
There's this beautiful little children's story by Harry Nielsen, and it's narrated by Ringo Starr in the, I'm dating myself now, but it's Harry Nielsen's The Point. And it's about this little kid, Oblio, with a round head in a world full of pointy-headed people. And at the end of the whole story, I'm going to give away the punchline. He comes back from the pointless forest to the town people who have cast him out and made him in exile. And he says, in the pointless forest, everything had a point. The trees had a point. The bees had a point on their stinger. Everything had a point. Shouldn't get emotional about this. It's a children's story. But so he said, I figured if everything had a point, then maybe I have a point too. And somebody says he's got a point there.
Makes me think too that we focused on let deeds, not words, be your adorning, right? Deeds. It's our deeds, right? In this world, the way that we're treating each other, the way that we're tending to the soil, every action that we do and the deeds that we're doing to help serve our community, to help serving our families are really, really key. But it's just the words, and that's again what Wade's saying is that it's not helpful to, again, just be focused on that, but to let deeds, not words, be your adorning.
Absolutely. It's also been said that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And I think embodying that warrior spirit, if we're continuing this mindset shift, is not necessarily physically fighting, but really committing and reminding one another of the larger picture of allowing yourself to be nourished by peace rather than conflict.
And that's go ahead.
Well, and Sienna, I know we're getting close to the end here. I just wanted to thank you for inviting us and commend you on the work that you're doing and bringing various voices and the way that you do it with such patience, detachment, and beauty. It's just an honor to be a part of the discussion.
I agree.
That's very kind of you. I was just reminiscing of the time where we had the kids harvest salads and we made herbal lavender mint tea from the teapots, those container gardens that we planted before camp. And in a way, that's a form of service. It's a form of being of service to one another and to the property, but also like to each other, to allow one another to be nourished by the piece, um, and allowing what we eat to shape our care for each other. It's a beautiful process. And as we wrap up here, what do you think you've taught youth, or we have taught youth, about having, God forbid, hope for the future, especially when cultivation is slow, patience is necessary, and outcomes just aren't immediate?
Well, I think we strive to focus on, again, the purpose of our lives here and to be those stewards. So I hopefully we instilled that in the kids, and hopefully they will, develop that capacity, that love for the natural world, and hopefully for the future generations to take care of it. Because as one documentary says, if the soil dies, we die, so really that is going to be a key component to the future, and our youth are the future. So hopefully that's something we instilled in them.
Yeah, it's kind of like a yin yang feeling that I'm getting, because, yeah, the camp absolutely was created as a safe space, an incubator, a place to come and experience things, a loving environment. But part of the purpose of it was to teach self-reliance. Obviously, to teach that we need each other and that we must form a community, but each of us, in each of them, had to step up at one point in the leadership course, in the obstacle course. There came the time where you had to do something for the team and for others and for yourselves. And so this idea, let's take climate change, big thing, right? This is one of the sources of contention. What is it? Where's it coming from? What should we do about it? People, are up in arms. There were recent rulings rescinding things about, that were established years ago, and different administrations are tacking to the left or the right on some of these issues, and it's an important, very important thing. But just one data point, and Angela has the stats better than this. She's researched into it, but during World War II, you had these victory gardens, and 60+% of Americans grew some or all of their own food. And in today's world, it's less than 1% of Americans are growing some of their own food. There's no ability to take care of oneself. Being able to take care of oneself, knowing that you can actually grow food and then participate in the preparation of that food, is a skill, is an awareness that has been lost. And it's so critical. So yeah, on the one hand, we have these safe spaces and these programs for people to learn and grow, but we're teaching resilience and self-reliance, so that when that cocoon of the safe space is broken open, the child can actually know how to fly.
And it's natural, in this day and age, to roll our eyes at the term safe spaces. But when kids are kids, when they're young, I think it's fair to give them somewhat safe spaces, and to like harden them off as seedlings, give them the tools, the resilience to remain strong in their values when they are released, like butterflies or like bees. And climate change, is a whole big topic, but I'm glad that you brought it up, because we have these broad, big topics that can be very overwhelming when it comes to the earth, to the natural world. But we also have our little microcosm. So for listeners who just want to start where they are, what is one small act of cultivation, whether in the soil or in their community, that they can begin to do?
Yeah, and just to add one thought to that, I grew up in a world where, as kids, and in the going to high school, junior high and high school, we were taught about what we can do basically as a consumer, right? You can recycle, you can, reuse, but that's like a reactive. what can you do to actually create? Imagine if 60% of us started growing our own foods. Imagine what that would do to the need to preserve food, massive, large scale agriculture, transport the foods, maintain them, introduce elements in them to preserve them, which are not healthy for you. I mean, if we just got back to that, that would transform. And it's not about now avoiding doing the bad thing, like don't mix your recyclables together, right? Don't overconsume, don't use plastics, don't do this, don't do that. It's like the 10 commandments. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and this is forbidden and that's forbidden. This is saying here's what you can do and must do and will do, right? Create, produce, grow some of your own food, teach your children to become somewhat self-reliant, to have that resiliency and not need to get everything from everybody else.
Yeah, I agree. If everyone did their part, it would make a huge difference, right? Or maybe starting a compost pile, right? A small compost pile to, turn those bits of food into soil, learning that. And it's really easy just to take your food bits and put it and mix it with the brown and the greens and help to create your own soil. It's not hard to do.
Or many places, even semi-urban settings, will allow you to have a chicken or two, right? To where you can, compost some things and give other scraps to the chickens, get some eggs, learn how to care for another living thing. I can't tell you at this time, when there's no time left, to tell the little micro lessons I've learned about just taking care of the chickens on our property.
I remember when one or more of them got loose. What was her name? The rebellious one?
I don't know.
Might have been Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins and Scarlett Johansson. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it was Scarlett. It was Scarlett. Yeah.
Yeah. We have so many now. It's hard we have like over close to 30. So we've grown in our chickens.
And 3 roosters.
So we can't keep track of them now, their names.
Sounds like a whole extended family. Well, likewise, if I haven't said it already, it is an honor to work with you and to be continuously cultivating our friendships. And I look forward to seeing what you're doing in Wisconsin and collaborating, whether in person or in tandem between our 2 states. For anyone that's curious to look more into the Royal Falcon Foundation and your work in general, where can people find you?
Royal Falcon Foundation, one word.org. Is the place to go. There are also videos. You'll see Sienna in action at our camps here and in Arizona. Some interesting, diverse ones that were there. That's probably the best place to go in the context of this particular episode. And if you want to reach out to us, do you want to give your email?
I think reaching out through the website is the best way. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, we will put that link amongst a few others regarding our work and your podcasting and writing in the show notes. And
the podcast is called Created in the Image of God. And this tagline is Building Vibrant Communities. So you can also find that on YouTube. And my name on Substack is where I do a lot of my writing.
Great. Well, thank you. It was a gift to connect with you on the mic with both of you, and I look forward to what's next.
Thank you, Sienna.
Thank you, Sienna.
It's been an honor.